Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to do a deep dive into a Newsweek article. It really caught my eye. It's about how much billionaire wealth surged in 2024. But we're not going to just, talk about the numbers. We want to look deeper and see, what this means about, how much power tech has over the economy and then what it means for us, like regular people, when we think about, inequality.
It's like we're using a magnifying glass to look at the things changing our world right now.
Exactly. So the article starts with a really big statement. It basically says that America's billionaires had an amazing year. I mean, we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars added to their total wealth. It's kind of like winning the lottery, but on a huge scale.
Yeah, the scale is, it's really surprising, actually. The top 10 Centibillionaires, the people worth over $100 billion, they added like $730 billion to their fortunes just this year. So it's basically like the whole GDP of Taiwan.
Whoa, that really puts things in perspective. The article also talks about how Elon Musk, his net worth alone, went up by $222 billion. That's mostly because of how well Tesla stock did. I mean, that's more than some countries' entire economies. It's wild, but also kind of, makes you think.
It does make you wonder, yeah. And the article then says that these massive gains are mostly in one area, tech.
It seems like every time I turn around, some tech company is breaking records and changing whole industries. But is this kind of growth gonna last? It makes me think about the dot-com bubble back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Could we be heading for a similar crash, you think?
Oh, well, that is the big question, isn't it? I mean, the potential of all this new tech is huge, but we got to remember what happened with the dot-com thing. Back then, companies were valued super high, mostly based on hype and promises about this digital revolution. But then when the bubble burst, a lot of companies just disappeared overnight.
Yeah.
It was a pretty hard lesson about what happens when the market gets too excited.
Okay, so we're seeing a similar boom in tech now, and maybe some of it is hype. But this time, it feels like there's more to it. We're talking about real changes, like in AI, cloud computing, and software. That stuff is changing how everything works. Do you think those changes mean it's different this time?
Yeah, they definitely do. The tech driving this boom is totally different from the dot-com stuff. It's not just about connecting people online anymore. This is about changing how we work, how we live, how we interact with the whole world, basically.
So the question isn't really whether the technology is revolutionary, but whether the value people are putting on it is too high.
Exactly. It's all about finding a balance,
Right.
recognizing real innovation, but not getting carried away with irrational excitement.
And speaking of finding a balance, the article also brings up some really important questions about economic inequality. All these billionaires are getting richer, but it's happening while regular people are dealing with inflation and their wages aren't going up much. It's pretty hard to ignore that contrast.
Yeah, it's a key point. While these tech companies are making tons of money, not everyone is benefiting equally. The gap between the rich and the poor is getting bigger, and that has some serious implications for, our society as a whole.
The article even mentioned Bernard Arnault, the guy who runs LVMH, that luxury goods company, and Françoise Bettencourt-Meyers, she's the L'Oreal heiress. They actually lost money this year. It's kind of weird that even in a year when so many people got super rich, some people lost a lot.
It just shows that, wealth isn't a fixed thing. It's always changing, going up and down. Depends on lots of things.
No?
What's happening in the markets, new technology, what consumers are doing, and even global events. It's a system that's constantly shifting, and that means there could be winners and losers, sometimes in ways you wouldn't expect.
And it makes you think, if even those luxury giants are losing money, what does that mean for normal people and small businesses? What are they dealing with?
It shows us how important it is to see the whole picture. Tech might be doing great, but other industries are struggling, and that affects the whole economy. We got to remember that economic success doesn't always reach everyone equally.
Right. It's about looking past the headlines and seeing how all of these trends connect to each other. So we've got this huge growth in tech, which might be similar to the dot-com bubble. And then we've got worries about the gap between rich and poor getting bigger. It's a complicated picture of what's happening in the economy, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting puzzle, and we're still figuring out how all the pieces fit together.
And that's why this deep dive is so cool. It's not just about understanding the numbers. It's about understanding what these trends mean for the future. So let's keep digging into that. What are some of the key takeaways from the article that we should be thinking about?
Well, one thing that really struck me is that this concentration of wealth in tech, it's not just an economic issue, it's a societal issue, and it could even become a political one.
That's a great point. And it's something the article mentions when it talks about Donald Trump getting reelected and how well the stock market is doing. Makes you think about how all this wealth in tech might affect politics in the next few years.
Yeah, it's something to think about. History shows us that money often leads to political power. So, as the tech industry keeps getting richer, it's pretty reasonable to think that their influence on politics will grow too.
It's almost like we're watching a new power structure being built, one where these big tech companies are right there with the traditional politicians. And that brings up some interesting questions. Who gets to make the rules? And who benefits from those rules?
It's something to keep an eye on, for sure. As we go forward, it'll be really important to see how this concentration of wealth in tech affects things like government decisions, regulations, and basically what direction our society goes in.
And that takes us right to the heart of this deep dive. We've seen how tech is creating a ton of wealth, but it's also making inequality worse. It's a powerful force that's changing not just the economy, but maybe our society and politics too. So the question is, what does it all mean? What happens next?
That's where things get really interesting. We're at a point where the decisions we make, both as individuals and as a society, are going to determine what kind of future we have.
Yeah,
I think that's a pretty powerful message for everyone listening to consider.
absolutely. This conversation needs to continue. But before we get too deep into the what ifs, let's break down some of the specifics. What are some of the things that could happen because of this concentration of wealth in tech? What should we be looking out for?
One thing that could happen is we might see social mobility start to, disappear.
Oh, wow. That's kind of scary to think about.
Yeah, it is. I mean, if the gap between rich and poor keeps getting bigger, it can get harder and harder for people to move up in the world. People who are born into, tough situations might get stuck there. And the people at the top, they might just stay there, passing their wealth down to their kids, creating like a new kind of, aristocracy almost.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like we'd be going back to like a feudal system where like what you're born into determines your whole life.
There are definitely some similarities, and that's why it's so important to make sure that everyone, no matter where they come from, has access to good education, job training, and real opportunities to get ahead. We got to create a system that, rewards hard work and talent, not just where you were born.
It makes you wonder about like what the government should do about all this. Should they like make policies to try to spread the wealth around more, like maybe make rich people pay more taxes, or would that just like mess up innovation in the economy?
That's a really tough question, and there's no easy answer. Some people say that, yeah, higher taxes on the rich could help pay for programs that, level the playing field. Stuff like healthcare, education, making housing more affordable. But other people worry that doing that would discourage people from investing and starting businesses, which could hurt the economy in the long run.
Yeah, it's like you got to find the right balance, right?
Yeah,
How do you deal with inequality without like messing up the things that make the economy grow?
it needs a smart approach, one that, recognizes both the importance of economic growth and fairness for everyone. Maybe it's about encouraging companies to invest in their workers, create better paying jobs, and share the profits more broadly. Or maybe it's about investing in education and training programs so people have the skills they need to succeed in, a world where things are changing so fast.
So instead of just focusing on like taking money from the rich after they've made it, we should be trying to create a system where more people have a chance to get rich in the first place.
Right. It's about giving people the power to make their own lives better, creating a system where everyone has a fair shot, and building an economy that includes everyone, not just a few people at the top.
You know, the article mentioned that a lot of the wealth this year came from the stock market. But most people, they don't own a lot of stock. So are they really benefiting from all this growth?
That's a really important point. We look at the stock market, and a lot of people think, oh, the economy's doing great. But that doesn't always mean things are good for people who aren't directly invested in the market. A lot of people are struggling to pay their bills. Housing costs are going up. Healthcare is expensive. Everything costs more. There's this growing gap between Wall Street and Main Street, and that's a big concern.
It's like there are two different worlds right next to each other. One world is seeing all this amazing success, and the other world is just trying to keep up.
Yeah, and when that happens, you can get social unrest, political instability, people lose trust in the system. It reminds us that economic growth by itself isn't enough. We have to make sure that the benefits of that growth are shared more fairly, so everyone feels like they're part of it.
Speaking of social unrest, I was reading about how, like, Social media has made political arguments and divisions in society even worse. Do you think the same thing could happen with this gap between the rich and poor getting bigger?
It's definitely possible. When people feel like the system is rigged against them, they start looking for answers, and sometimes they find those answers in, like extreme ideas or fake news. Social media can be like a bubble, where you only hear things that confirm what you already believe, and that makes the divisions even deeper. It's something we need to watch out for as we figure out how to deal with all this wealth and power in the tech industry.
So it's not just about like the economic effects of all this tech wealth. There could be social and political consequences too, right?
Absolutely. It's a complicated problem with a lot of different aspects. It's something that needs our attention, and we got to think about it carefully. We can't just like sit back and hope it all works out on its own. We got to be involved in shaping the future we want.
And that brings us back to like the role of technology in all this. We've been talking about how it's creating wealth, but also making inequality worse. So could technology also be part of the solution? I mean, can it help fix the problems it's creating?
I think it definitely can. Technology is a powerful tool, and like any tool, it can be used in good ways or bad ways. It all depends on us,
Yeah.
how we decide to use it.
So it's not about saying technology is bad. It's about figuring out how to use its power to make things better for everyone.
Exactly. We need to think creatively about how to use technology to create a society that's more fair and just. Like, could we use AI to make education and job training better? Could it help people get better access to healthcare and social services? Could we use it to build more sustainable and inclusive economic models? These are all questions worth asking.
Those are some really interesting ideas. It's like instead of technology making the gap bigger, it could actually help bridge the gap.
Right. It's about recognizing that technology isn't like this unstoppable force that's going to control everything. It's a tool that we can use to build the future we want, good or bad. The decisions we make today will determine which path we take.
And that's a really powerful message. We're not just watching this tech revolution happen, we're part of it. And we have a responsibility to speak up and do something to make sure it benefits everyone, not just a few people.
I totally agree. We need to be informed, we need to be involved, and we need to be proactive in creating the future we want. And the first step is understanding the problems, knowing what could happen if we don't do anything, and seeing the opportunities that are out there.
You know, this conversation has really shown how everything is connected. We started talking about billionaires getting richer, but we've touched on so many other things like social mobility, how much power tech has in politics, the role of government, the impact of technology, and the need to think about ethics and all this stuff. It's all tied together.
Yeah, it's like a big web of different forces all pushing and pulling on each other, and it's hard to know exactly what's going to happen next. But that's what makes this so interesting. It challenges us to look beyond just what's right in front of us and think about the bigger picture, how everything fits together.
This deep dive is really living up to its name, huh? We're getting into the nitty-gritty, looking at things from all sides, and uncovering those hidden connections that shape our world. It's a lot to process, but it's so valuable.
I couldn't agree more. These are the kinds of conversations we need to be having if we want to make sense of the crazy world we live in and figure out how to make it better.
And that brings me to something else I wanted to talk about. The article mentioned the possibility of a dot-com style crash. We talked about how this tech boom feels different, but are there any signs that things might be getting out of control? What should we be watching out for?
Yeah, there are always signs, but they can be tricky to spot.
Yeah.
Well, one thing to keep an eye on is if the value people are putting on companies doesn't match up with how much money those companies are actually making. If it's all based on hype and what people think might happen in the future,
Yeah.
that could be a problem.
So it's like you wouldn't buy a house just because someone told you it might become a famous landmark someday, right? You'd want to know what it's actually worth now.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And just like with a housing bubble, a tech bubble can burst when investors realize that, hey, these companies aren't actually worth as much as everyone thought they were.
And then everyone starts freaking out and selling their stock.
Yay.
Trying to get out before they lose everything, which just makes prices drop even more.
Exactly. It's like the fear of a crash can actually cause the crash.
So what are some specific things that might tell us that a tech bubble is forming? What should we be looking for?
Well, one thing is how much debt companies are taking on. If they're borrowing tons of money to grow really fast, that could be risky. If the market takes a downturn, they could be in trouble.
It's like building a house of cards, you know? It looks impressive until someone, breathes on it too hard and the whole thing collapses.
Another thing to watch out for is Too much speculation. That's when people are buying stocks just because they think the price will keep going up, even if the company isn't really doing that well.
It's like that tulip craze back in the 1600s, right? People were paying crazy amounts of money for tulip bulbs, not because they were, like, beautiful or anything, but because they thought they could sell them for even more later.
Yeah, exactly. And, well, we all know how that ended. The bubble burst, and a lot of people lost everything.
So we got to learn from history, right? And be careful about getting too caught up in the excitement.
Definitely. It's always important to do your research, understand what you're getting into, and, not just blindly follow the crowd.
You know, one thing that seems different about this tech boom compared to the dot-com thing is AI. Artificial intelligence is getting into everything these days, and it seems like it could, like, change everything.
Yeah, AI is a real game changer, for sure.
Yeah.
It's already changing industries like healthcare, finance, transportation, entertainment, you name it. And as AI gets more advanced, its impact is only going to get bigger.
It's pretty exciting, but also a little bit, scary. I've heard some experts say that AI could eventually become smarter than humans, leading to this thing called the singularity.
Ah, yes, the singularity. It's a fascinating idea. Basically, it's the point where AI becomes so smart that it can create even smarter AI, and then things just, like, take off from there.
Mhm.
Technological progress would speed up exponentially.
I can't even wrap my head around what that would be like.
It's mind-blowing, right? But whether or not we actually reach the singularity, it's clear that AI is going to play a huge role in shaping the future.
So how do we prepare for this AI-powered world? Like, what skills are going to be important?
I think the most important skill is going to be adaptability.
Yeah.
Being able to learn new things quickly, embrace change, and think critically. That's going to be essential in a world where technology is constantly changing.
So it's not just about what you already know, it's about being able to keep learning and adapt to new information and new tech.
Exactly. It's about having a growth mindset, being curious, and being willing to try new things, even if they're outside your comfort zone.
And we need to encourage creativity and innovation too, right? AI might be able to do a lot of tasks, but it can't replace human creativity and imagination.
Absolutely. Being able to think outside the box, come up with new ideas, and solve problems in creative ways, that's going to be even more valuable in a world with AI.
It's almost like to thrive alongside these super smart machines, we need to become even more human.
I think you're right. We need to focus on our emotional intelligence, our empathy, our compassion, and our sense of purpose. Those are the things that make us different from AI and allow us to make real, meaningful contributions to the world.
You know, this whole conversation has really made me think about the bigger picture. We started talking about billionaires, but we've talked about so much more. Social mobility, the power of tech in politics, the role of government, the impact of technology, and the need to make ethical choices. It's all connected, isn't it?
It really is. It's like a giant tapestry
Right.
with all these different threads woven together, each one affecting the others in ways that are hard to predict. But that's what makes it so fascinating to explore. It challenges us to think beyond just our own little corner of the world and consider the larger context.
Well, this deep dive has definitely lived up to its name. We've gone deep, looked at things from all sides, and uncovered all these hidden connections that shape the world around us. It's a lot to take in, but it's been incredibly valuable.
I couldn't agree more. It's by having these kinds of conversations, grappling with these complex issues, that we can start to make sense of the world we live in and figure out how we can make it better.
And that's what we're all about here, right? Helping people understand the world a little better, think critically, and maybe even spark some action. So to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. Until next time.
Thanks for listening.